Now? Okay, good. Thank you. Welcome to ChronosHub webinar, November 11th. This is Trust Through Verification, Implementing STM's Researcher Identity Framework. So I'll be moderating the webinar. My name is Anthony Apodaca, and I am the head of product here at ChronosHub. I'm joined by Richard Northover, consultant product manager in the identity space for STM Solutions, Andy Hurd, Senior Director of Business Technology at IEEE, and Marjorie Thibault, Senior Product Designer here at ChronosHub. So we have 3 speakers and 3 topics. We will start off with Richard talking about trusted identity in academic publishing, the researcher identity verification framework. Then we'll pass it on to Andy for balancing trust and accessibility, implementing researcher identity verification in scholarly publishing, and finally, Marjorie Thibault for practical approaches from a product perspective. Throughout the entire webinar, you can feel free to use the Q&A button. I will be tracking all the questions and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We're also going to take a brief Q&A after each speaker because some of the topics might be very specific to that section, and we thought we could just address a few, as we go. But then we'll also have another a chance for conversation and questions at the end. So feel free to start as soon as you're ready posting questions. And lastly, thank you all so much for coming. We're very excited to do this. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Richard.
Thanks very much, Anthony. I will share my screen. There we go. So hi everyone, and yeah, thanks again, Anthony, for the introduction. So this is a talk about trusted identity in academic publishing. It is a boiled down version of a much longer presentation, so I'm going to skip over quite a lot of the detail, but please obviously see these original reports if you're interested and you haven't already. I think we can provide the links later. So I've been running a working group at STM with members from a range of organizations, and we've produced these 2 reports so far. And I just want to say something important at the outset, which is that this is a conceptual framework for discussion rather than something that anyone is being told what to do. Everyone, all publishers and editorial systems need to make independent decisions about this subject. But we really hope that this framework helps with thinking about this subject. So let's just get into it, starting with what the problem is. So we all know that research fraud is an increasingly serious problem with serious consequences for everyone involved. We have found from looking into this as a group that many cases of fraud involve identity manipulation, so fake accounts, impersonation, and so on. And the thing is that this manipulation is relatively easy because of the way editorial workflows tend to be designed. But here's the thing, adding identity verification is pretty difficult for understandable reasons, which I'll go to in a moment, and we'll talk a bit more about in this panel. So what are the main things I want to say here? Well, firstly, there is no single magic answer to this because all journals have different needs on the one hand, and researchers across the world are highly variable in what they can do to prove that they are who they say they are. I want to say that trust and verification is how we gain trust, is about getting information and being able to use it to make decisions, and also about creating feedback loops of accountability, which is also something we can perhaps talk about more. Finally, all of this is a work in progress, so we're actively learning and finding out more and responding to feedback, and this panel is a great part of that, so I am glad to be here. Let's look at a really simplified version of the editorial process today. An author, say, comes in on the left there, and they generally sign in with a convenient Gmail address or equivalent, or at least they can. And they submit their paper, and this kicks off the peer review process. Reviewers are similarly invited to sign in and submit their reviews, and co-authors are sometimes added, and all being well, the paper is published. The problem is there are many variations of this, so I'm just picking on one common scenario. This process can be subverted by someone potentially acting as their own reviewer or impersonating someone else in various ways. And this is because their identity is simply trusted as being what they say it is. There's nothing, generally speaking, there's nothing to verify it. So we can get fake papers, fake reviews, fake co-authors, and so on. So what are we going to do? Well, first of all, some principles to lay out. First of all, we need to make sure that we don't exclude legitimate people in the process of weeding out bad actors. Next, we need to make the process easy because, as we know, workflows can be burdensome enough as it is. We need to avoid collecting unnecessary personal data, especially as some researchers need to remain pseudonymous and so on. So we've got to stick with all the privacy guardrails that we would expect. And obviously, the whole process verification needs to be physically possible. We can't come up with solutions that can't be implemented. So next, we need to have a bit of a think about what trust actually is based on. And the way we've been thinking about it is that it's about getting information that real researchers find easy to provide, but dishonest ones don't. And that means things that are hard to fake or that have backup from other trusted entities. And another thing is establishing routes to accountability, a bit like having a license plate on your car that kind of provides a way to work out who's breaking the speed limit. Accountability can be at the level of the individual person, or potentially at the level of the organization that vouched for that person. And more on that in a second. So if we add a verification step to a user journey, and remember, it's not one size fits all, we'll talk about that in a second, we can make a decision to allow some people to continue and not allow others through, or at least to allow them through with additional scrutiny. So if they are allowed through and they go on to act dishonestly, there needs to be something that can be done about that, some form of accountability. Without a route to accountability, it's like a speed camera taking a photograph of a car and then nothing happening as a result. So that's a super fast overview. The researcher identity verification framework itself consists of a bunch of these points. First, we have assessment, which is where individual journals and their editors make a decision about how much trust is enough based on their situation, their perception of risk, and so on. Then we have verification itself and the mechanisms that are used to do this. And we propose a range of methods, which I'll show in just a second, because not all researchers can use all of those methods. And so you need a kind of a menu. Then there's the process of interpreting the information that verification gives you so that you can make a decision. And finally, there's the idea of the feedback loop. It's not just a one-off decision and that's it. We need to make sure that information goes back into the system for next time and gradually improves the whole process. Now, when we look at each of the possible verification methods, we're looking at them from a couple of different angles. What the method says about individual identity, what evidence it provides that a person is genuinely an academic researcher, and like I've said a moment ago, what the routes to accountability there are. So if we look at a range of methods, verification methods, starting with the status quo of generic email addresses, and then going down through institutional IDPs and email addresses, using ORCID with trust markers, passport verification, government document verification, and then a fallback of speaking directly to a potential author. We can look at what each of these provides just as a kind of a quick overview, and we can see that non-institutional email doesn't give us anything. It doesn't. Anybody could generate any of those Gmail addresses, any number of them, and so it doesn't give us any concrete evidence or route to accountability. Institutional IDPs and email addresses, institutional email addresses, give us a bit of both and a potential route to accountability via that institution. But like I've said, not everybody has access to that route. ORCID with trust markers can similarly give us information about the person and about what they may have done in the past, with a route to accountability via the organizations that vouched for those claims as being true, rather than just being something that a person claimed about themselves, which is what trust markers are. Passport verification is an alternative, and it's a strong form of individual identity, which can be used to potentially strengthen the other claims that people make and potentially help with holding them individually accountable. If none of those things is possible, then we fall back, like I said, to more manual direct contact. And there are other options too, which I haven't mentioned here, but which we talk about in the report. So what are the main recommendations of the framework, just quickly? Well, the main one is, like I've said, is to add verification where appropriate to the specific context of an individual journal, because relying on untrustable things like generic email address is leaving the door open to manipulation and fraud. The other main recommendation is to make use of trust markers. It just happens that ORCID is the best example of this mechanism for now. That means adding verified claims to ORCID records, as well as reading them and interpreting them and following the chain of accountability that they bring in. We've still got lots of work we're doing on this subject, and this includes thinking about how the user experience could work, how different verification methods differ in their availability across the world. And like I say, we're working on these questions now, and some of the other presentations that you'll see in a moment will touch on some of these things. So just a final summary and takeaway. Identity manipulation can be a big part of academic fraud. Verification is about getting evidence to help tell the difference between legitimate researchers and those who are acting dishonestly. Remember that there's variability here. We don't always have the same level. We don't need the same level of trust all the time, and can't rely on there being a single way to verify people. Overall, this is about getting information that separates legitimate and dishonest people, and about finding routes to accountability so that there's a feedback loop if someone does act fraudulently. So thank you very much, and over to you again, Anthony.
Thank you, Richard. We do have one question that came in, which is, has any research been done into what researchers think about this issue? Are they keen to appear, quote, verified?
So that's a very good question, and that's exactly the next thing that we are working on. We've been putting together some user experience studies with real researchers to put a kind of a prototype of this type of user journey in front of them to answer that very question. And an upcoming report that we'll share will lay out the results of that study. But yeah, I mean, clearly that's a really important question. But anecdotally, from talking to various people, not just publishers but other people, there is an appetite and an understanding for this, but we haven't kind of quantified it really just yet.
All right, thank you. And there's no more questions on that piece, so we will move over to Andy. Thank you again, Richard.
Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Anthony. So Richard has been leading an STM working group on researcher identity, and I am also a member of that group. So there should be consistency between our two presentations. As Richard said, creating a fake identity is as easy as creating a Gmail account or asking Dolly to create an image of a dishonest author masquerading as Thomas Edison. This slide gets a big laugh at IEEE. I assume there's laughter behind the attendees. Let's go. All right, so researcher fraud and identity manipulation, they've become significant threats to scholarly integrity. It undermines trust in the academic publishing ecosystem. And as Richard had said, publishers traditionally relied on implicit trust, assuming that everyone, an author, reviewer, editor, are acting in good faith. But recent trends show that fraudulent actors are spoiling it for the largely trustworthy people that orbit in the scholarly publishing. They exploit weaknesses in editorial systems, leading to mass retractions and reputational damage. So the challenge for publishers is to maintain absolute trust in participants while minimizing friction for legitimate researchers in a process which is already somewhat cumbersome. So that requires implementing proportionate and inclusive verification measures that deter fraud without creating barriers for honest contributors. That's hard to do. The goal is to strike a balance between security and accessibility, and ensuring that verification processes are robust yet user-friendly. One thing to note is, what we were talking about, and I thought maybe this would be useful to just cite a few examples. And these, for publishers in the audience, this is particularly if you work within publishing ethics, these examples will be familiar to you. I think they're endemic, where a fictional reviewer account is created by someone within the editorial chain of command to insert reviewers to manipulate peer review. Spoofed emails are created to represent some authoritative figure to manipulate the peer review process. Stolen identities where people are masquerading as someone else and asking for things to be done, again, manipulating the peer review process. And unwitting co-authors, people with influence are added to as co-authors to papers and as a means to influencing the acceptance and peer review of those papers. So why does this matter? The current reliance on minimal identity checks, it's often limited to email verification. It's insufficient to safeguard scholarly publishing, and fraudulent practices such as paper mills, fake peer reviews, and impersonation have led to thousands of retractions, eroding trust in the scholarly record, and damaging reputations. The incidents incur financial costs, waste editorial resources, and compromise the credibility of research outputs. That doesn't just affect publishers, it affects everybody who relies on the integrity of the publishing of the scholarly record. So we face a strategic imperative to protect integrity while ensuring accessibility for legitimate researchers. So strengthening verification can act as a deterrent to bad actors and provide accountability mechanisms, but it has to be implemented thoughtfully to avoid excluding researchers who lack access to certain verification methods, and Richard spoke to that. So effective identity verification has to adhere to the key principles. I won't dwell on this except to say that this is what Richard had spoken to. We have to ensure transparency and be in compliance with things like GDPR. But feasibility emphasizes that it's simple, scalable, and self-service that integrates seamlessly into our editorial systems. Accountability establishes clear routes for consequences if fraudulent behavior occurs, reinforcing trust in the system. So publishers face a fundamental tension. Achieving absolute trust requires strong identity checks, such as institutional authentication or document verification, while reducing friction demands, minimizing the steps that could deter participation. Overly stringent measures risk discouraging submissions and harming inclusivity, whereas lax measures invite fraud and compromise integrity. The challenge lies in calibrating verification and to be proportionate to risk, ensuring that high-risk roles like editors or guest editors in particular undergo rigorous checks while low-risk actions remain streamlined. This balancing act is central to maintaining a fair and efficient scholarly publishing environment where trust and accessibility coexist without undermining each other. So as Richard had pointed out, there are several actions that are recommended to strengthen identity verification. Introducing these steps for authors, reviewers, and editors, separating sign-in credentials from verification methods, that allows flexibility, leveraging things that are already in our ecosystem like ORCID trust markers to validate affiliations and academic contributions, offering multiple verification routes such as institutional IDPs, email confirmation, document verification, and manual fallback options, and monitoring outcomes to create that feedback loop that Richard talked about for continuous improvement. These measures aim to enhance trust without imposing disproportionate burdens, ensuring that verification processes are adaptable and inclusive. And we would start to adopt these recommendations incrementally, starting with these high-risk workflows and expanding as infrastructure and familiarity grows. So this risk-based approach ensures that verification is proportionate to the potential impact of fraudulent actions. High-risk roles, such as guest editors with decision-making authority, warrant stringent checks. Lower risk actions, like initial manuscript uploads, may require basic verification. The framework involves assessing risk levels based on action severity and journal profile, applying appropriate verification methods, evaluating outcomes, and maintaining a feedback loop for continuous refinement. This prevents one-size-fits-all solutions and allows publishers to tailor verification processes to their specific contexts, balancing security with usability. In fact, within publishers, that risk profile may vary based journal to journal. So publishers can begin by piloting these verification processes for reviewers and editors, and collaboration across the industry is essential to develop shared infrastructure such as email domain validation services and to push trust markers into ORCID profiles. So there's that, the contribution back to the community. Clear communication with researchers about the purpose and benefits of verification will help build acceptance and reduce resistance. Transparency in design and consistency in user experience. That's really important. Why the survey that Richard had spoken, that it's just about to launch, will across the platforms will further enhance trust and usability. These practical steps lay the groundwork for scalable and effective implementation of identity verification. I think it's useful to note, at IEEE nearly, and this is just one segment, but nearly 20% of reviewers use non-institutional email addresses. And there are a variety of reasons that it makes sense. It's a persistent email, independent of where they may be currently employed, which may change. But most of those email addresses that we have can be linked back to an institutional email. So it's fine to trust the generic email as long as you've connected it. There are a few that we don't have connected. So having good analytics and being able to track is essential for this whole identity verification. So I feel like I'm beating a dead horse in terms of emphasizing this balance between friction for legitimate users and implementing the ID verification, making sure we have inclusivity and looking at the cost implications, and using institutional or industry methods such as institutional login and ORCID integration. Additionally, remembering verification choices across platforms to reduce repetition and provide fallback options for researchers without institutional affiliation. And shared services and standards can help manage costs and complexity. Addressing these challenges proactively ensures that verification processes remain fair, efficient, and widely accessible. So the identity verification offers significant benefits. Researchers gain confidence in a fair and transparent process. We hope that's what they feel. And the community benefits from enhanced trust in the scholarly record. And it supports a long-term integrity and sustainability of academic publishing. And so publishers must resist imposing an onerous verification process on researchers, and when unavoidable, make its effect persistent to exempt that researcher from having to repeat the same steps for quite some time. Ideally, being able to share that across publishers would be great. So, and working through it, organizations like STM will want to find common ground with institutions and librarians to create that loop of accountability for those few researchers who act poorly, and to convey the value of research identity verification to unearthing the scholarly record from fraudulent actions. And that, I think, about wraps it up. It's just, one, it's ID verification is essential. Publishers should engage stakeholders, pilot the verification workflows, and share these best practices through things like STM. And by adopting these measures, the academic community can collectively defend against fraud while preserving accessibility and fairness for all researchers.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Andy. We have a couple of questions for you, and you know, it can also be a conversation if any other panelists might have the answer. But any incentives or hurdles for organizations to nudge/enforce their researchers to set up ORCID to preserve their reputation?
So there are, at IEEE, and I think we're not alone in this, is that we require ORCID accounts to publish. To some degree, it varies by journal, I believe, but the intent is to require ORCID identities for all co-authors as well. And ORCID is working to shore up their accountability to make sure that when they do have an account, having an ORCID account doesn't guarantee that that person has been verified. It's those trust markers which help us to determine that, but it certainly helps.
All right, and this is a little long, so I'll read it intelligently here. At what point do verification mechanisms like enforcing authors to declare ORCIDs really need to kick in? At submission, revision, first final decision, how early or late is too early, too late? Thoughts on trade-offs on time, effort, cost spent on deferred verifications versus early checks?
I think that's part of the research we're going to try to find out. I think the earlier the better, and the less frequent the better. So if you can make whatever checks you do persistent, because authors are if you have an author who is particularly one who's a academic researcher, they're going to want to publish again. So it's our incentive to make sure that this is not overly burdensome. So doing it once, I think, is our goal, and then having that work across at least the publisher ecosystem would be great if that could be shared through things like ORCID with other publishers as well.
Thank you. And okay, two more questions. Thoughts on bold measures like Curious not allowing authors to recommend, suggest reviewers at all to eliminate the risk gap?
I can't argue with that. I think there's a certain amount. I mean, in certain fields it makes sense. I think, and but you have to apply a high level of scrutiny, and it's in the editorial process to vet any sort of recommended reviewers. But in general, it does seem to be problematic when you have that allowed.
Yeah. All right. So last question, and I think I'll invite Richard if you want to chime in here too, because I think it's kind of and Marjorie's been sitting quietly, but this one's interesting. How can we best learn from other industries where this has been in practice for some time? For example, banking.
Very good question.
Well, I mean, I could say just from my side, when we first started talking about this, we reviewed all of the different ways that that verification pops up in other parts of the world, other industries and so on. If you want to hire a car or use Airbnb or open a bank account or get a mortgage, these are all things that generally verification is well understood. And generally for things like that, the proportionality between what you're doing and, for example, using a passport to verify yourself, that's kind of well understood and accepted. But I think if we were to assume that academic publishing is exactly like hiring a car or getting on an aeroplane or something, we might be making a big mistake, because publishing and the world of academia in general is often biased towards, for very good reasons, biased towards academic freedom and people not necessarily being identified individually all the time. There's a very careful ethical separation between who the person is and what it is that they're saying in their research. So being kind of heavy-handed and assuming that the highest form of verification that you might see in other industries is immediately applicable in academia is something that I think we'd need to be careful about. And I think in a way that's what Andy was saying about balancing the accessibility that that researchers are used to, with having just enough trust to deter and defend against fraud. So yeah, that's why I was saying that this the first part of the framework to do with assessing risk is a really important thing. You don't just kind of go straight to the most nuclear option. It's got to be a proportionate thing.
Anything to add, Or
I agree.
you agree? Well said, Richard. Okay, so there's no more questions in the queue, and we will move on to our final speaker. Marjorie, over to you.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm gonna share my screen. So at ChronosHub, we started working on how to design an identity verification experience. And we have 4 elements that for us is very important to keep in mind. First, the transparency and trust. So we are always clear about why verification matters. It builds trust, ensures safety. Transparency means explaining benefits upfront, verified profiles stand out and gain credibility. And this isn't about restriction, it's about enhancing the submission process for author. It's not a barrier. The second one is that we want to add a gamification element. So gamification turns routine tasks into engaging challenges. It's by adding a progress bar, for example, or badges or achievement milestones. We make identity verification feel like leveling up more than a barrier. Verified author gains visibility and credibility, just like on social media, for example, with the badges, and this creates a sense of accomplishment and trust. The third one is the autonomy for publisher. Publishers set their own rules for verification requirement. Some may restrict submission to verify author, others may not. Our role at ChronosHub here would be just to provide flexibility and ensure there are always a clear, easy path for author to verify and keep submitting. And the last one is no friction for authors. So even if a publisher decides to block the submission for non-verified author, the author can still do a draft of the submission. He will never lose his work. The draft will always be there. It's just like the verification is optional for starting the submission flow, but you need to complete it to be able to continue. So I've worked on a prototype that I'm gonna share with you now. So we are on the publishing hub, and we are an author, and we want to publish for the microbiology and molecular biology review. So I'm gonna start submission. And here I can see that I have a warning message saying that I need to complete my author profile before the submission. So transparency, clear information. Your author profile must be completed to submit this to the journal. Draft can be started anytime, but identity verification is required for your submission. And then we also add what is the mandatory and information are missing. So an institutional email and the affiliation is not verified. Then on this element, we have 2 buttons. We have the learn more. So again, we add all the information for the author to understand why we are asking for that. And then the second one is complete your profile. So the user can continue, do a draft of the submission, or go directly to the profile to complete it. That's what I'm gonna do. And here on the profile, we can see the gamification element. So it's earn your verification badge to encourage the author to go through all the verification steps. So we have 2 already filled. So it's the personal information and the ORCID ID. And what is missing is the email address, so a non-institutional address. This is the warning message, so we need to add an institutional address. And the affiliation needs to be verified. So I'm gonna add my new address email up. I set as primary, verify. Email is sent to the address and with a verification code, something very basic, and saved. And now I'm gonna verify the affiliation. So same, verify now. And we have this model, and we need to log into the affiliation with the login information. Be sure that we have access to it. Login, save, and that's it. And now our user has his badge. Last thing also, we want to make sure that everyone can access if they can. So if they cannot verify their affiliation or add an email address that is valid, we are thinking about maybe it would be interesting to integrate a tool to allow them to upload an official identity document. So that's it for the prototype. And so to continue with my slides, the challenge that we faces is to balance research integrity with author experience. So we know that publisher wants to reduce friction for authors, but at the same time, identity validation could help address real research integrity issues. But right now, we don't know how effective it would be, and it's something that we need to test. So we know publishers have different trust requirements, but we don't know what markers matter the most, what level of trust should be required for submitting or reviewing. What about the accessibility? Should the lack of a passport block also a participant to publish? So there are many open questions, but our approach is to start optional. So just to encourage the user to verify their profile without blocking them, and then we can test several hypotheses, including if the authors are willing to take responsibility for building trust in their academic publishing field. But while some unknown remain, we believe that it's time to begin embedding trust in our systems. That's it.
Thank you very much, Marjorie. So I wanted to also just kind of take the opportunity to circle back to that first question on, has any research been done into what researchers think about the issue, and are they keen to appear verified? So, there's sort of the carrot and the stick approach. So we want to be able to pilot something that gives people the opportunity to do it and start collecting data. Because it's one thing to, do surveys and ask people, but behavior is a different animal altogether. So that's one of the initial steps for us, is putting something out there as perhaps an option, but it's not necessarily something that would enforce it. And then secondly, just to emphasize that the ultimate goal always would be allow our individual publishers, our customers, to choose their own ending, right? We don't want to be gatekeeping. The idea is to be able to have a framework for configuration, what trust means at different tiers of journals for different publishers. And then we do have a question at the top, a couple questions actually. Yeah. So we'll start with, there's a couple actually, one that I missed. Has there been any thoughts on including social media handles as well in verification steps, like LinkedIn, for example? And I think that's a question for you, and then but other STM group might have actually gone down this route, I'm assuming, at some point as well.
Definitely, yes. We are thinking about it, because it's difficult to fake a LinkedIn profile. But it's just a thought for now, from my side.
One thing that I might add about that is, so LinkedIn itself, as an example, does have its own verification system. So you can have a badge to show that you have a verified LinkedIn account. But one of the really interesting things, and one of the kind of complexities of this space, is that you can't actually share the verification from LinkedIn to other systems. It operates only within LinkedIn, and that's because I guess the systems that verify your passport are themselves independent systems, and if that information was just shared across all the other systems, then the business model of each of those systems would kind of fall apart. So it's a bit of a tricky thing to navigate. On the one hand, you want to be able to share things between systems so that you're not having to repeat the process of verification, but at the same time, you can't always share this information kind of second hand, third hand, fourth hand. So yeah, as long as it's an example of something, like I said, that a valid person can do and a dishonest person can't do, then it could be a useful addition to the list of things. But at the moment, the ones that I mentioned, like institutional identities and ORCID trust markers, those feel to me like the things that are best fit for this type of situation, as opposed to, LinkedIn works for LinkedIn, this isn't necessarily the same.
We do use LinkedIn as a support for disambiguation. So it does help to connect identities with each other, and but it's not I haven't thought too much about how it works within a verification process, but it is something that has been leveraged.
That's good to know.
And I'll segue to this next question, which is thoughts on having to set up and complete their profile on different submission systems versus having the universal profile on ORCID that all systems can sync to. Wishful thinking or possibility, question mark, smiley face.
I think both.
Yeah, both.
No, I think that would be ideal if there could be one trusted source for identity for everyone. But it's also, if that becomes vulnerable, and every publisher would have their own sort of assessment of the reliability of ORCID. And in fact, ORCID has not been, has its own vulnerabilities, and it's trying to shore that up with its trust markers. But creating an ORCID account is fairly easy. So there's no excuse for doing it, but it's also anybody can do it.
Yeah. So there's a question here that I can take. It was directed at you, but I'm not sure you know the answer. So which federations will the institute affiliation be set up through? So right now at ChronosHub, we're not going to be setting up those directly. We're going to be working with third parties. So right now we are going to be working on a prototype. We are discussing it with LibLinks, so the federations that they support will be included in the first review, but we're not going to be limited to that. On our side, we're building a validation framework. We'll be able to swap different tools in and out depending on the needs. So, and then I think our last question at the queue in the moment. ORCID has been a standard, but what else? Are there recommendations on creating a whole new paradigm and creating a new researcher identity framework? One that could help navigating the quote info sharing between systems unquote pain point that Richard just described?
Can you just repeat the first part of that question?
Yeah. So ORCID has been a standard, but what else? Are there recommendations on creating a whole new paradigm in creating a new researcher identity framework? One that could help navigating the info sharing between systems pain point.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that we're trying to avoid creating a whole new paradigm in a way, right? In lots of situations in lots of situations in life, people kind of go, okay, there isn't a perfect solution to this, so let's create a new solution to this. And then you've just got one extra possible solution. And so you end up creating more and more and more incomplete solutions. And I think what makes sense, but I'm really keen to hear whether people agree with this, that it kind of makes sense to try and build on top of things that already exist, which is why we've sort of mentioned using the same mechanisms that people use to gain access to scholarly resources, like signing in with your identity provider, and also using ORCID, rather than inventing a whole new paradigm that almost like competes with those things. It's like trying to stand on the shoulders of giants rather than inventing a whole new way of doing things, if possible. But there are proposals out there to create kind of researcher-specific government document verification systems, which in a way is a new entrant to the kind of ecosystem of ideas. Yeah, so I think there's a tension between trying to invent something new and trying to use what already exists to achieve this purpose. One other thing I would say is that there are other paradigms coming down the track, such as digital wallets, which are basically designed to do this kind of thing. It's just they're not fully widespread just yet. But I mean, you know, the US is just getting towards having passports in your digital wallet on your phone. And there's work in the EU about this. Over the next couple of years, it's going to become a much more common thing. So that's another area to mention here, which is that, you know, if you need to prove that you are who you say you are, or prove certain things about yourself in a privacy preserving way, where you prove, yeah, I really am from the University of California, but that's all you need to know, then that's where digital wallets come in. So yeah, I don't know whether that counts as inventing a new paradigm, but it's certainly introducing a new paradigm.
Yeah, thank you. Andy?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've been talking about trust in the identity, and there's the other side of trust, which is that although we trust you are who you say you are, we don't trust you. And those are, that's a different side of it, and that's the line of accountability that Richard has spoken about, is now that we know who you are, we know how we can make you accountable for the things that you do. And then how do you then, I think what we haven't totally figured out is, if we determine that someone we once trusted has done something really bad and we no longer will trust them, what's the information sharing there in a, you know, in a risk averse industry? I don't have the answer to that.
All right, there are no more questions in the queue, and we are just about out of time. So we will post a link to a feedback session in the chat. If you'd be so kind as to click on that and give us feedback, we'd be very grateful. I'm also going to pop my email in the chat if you want to ask any additional questions or just talk. That would be fine with me. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, yeah, thank you for, did you get the?
Yes. It's fine.
All right, cool. So you should have the link for the feedback. All right, there, I see it now. All right, so thank you all for joining, and thank you to Richard, Andy, and Marjorie, and I hope everyone found the conversation stimulating, and it's the first of many in kind of exploring a brand new space. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.